Rain stitched silver lines through the security lights at 2:13 a.m., needling the concrete behind Bellamore Tower until the loading dock looked lacquered and unreal. And Zoe Park stood under the metal awning with a paper cup of coffee gone bitter and cold, counting damp bills with fingers that had stopped feeling warm an hour earlier. 10, 20, 40, 60, $86 in tips, folded and refolded until the corners softened, while the left sole of her black work shoe peeled open at the ball of her foot and let rainwater wick through her sock each time she shifted her weight. Her spine ached from 14 hours on polished floors, her calves trembled when she stilled, and the fluorescent light above the service door made everyone look sallow and overexposed, like they were all one bad month away from disappearing. She tucked the cash into the zip pocket inside her tote and pulled out her phone, already knowing what waited there. 3 notifications sat pinned at the top, with red icons and timestamps from earlier that evening, each more formal than the last. Rent, overdue by 12 days. Electric, final reminder. Pharmacy balance, payment required for refill. Her brother's insulin was due in 2 days. Her checking account held $42.17. The numbers did not need interpretation. They pressed against her ribs with quiet, methodical force. A forklift beeped once from the far bay, and then went still. Somewhere inside the tower, dishwashers rattled pans and cutlery in industrial rhythm. The final percussion after a charity gala she had served with a neutral smile, and a tray she could carry one-handed through crowded tables without spilling. Banquet floor by night, accounts cleanup by dawn, same blazer, same careful voice, 2 time clocks, and 1 body that had begun to feel borrowed. She rolled her shoulders and heard a small click in her neck, then took a sip of coffee that tasted faintly of cardboard and old ash. "You're still here?" Mateo from night security pushed open the rear door, broad-shouldered in his navy jacket, rain caught on his shaved head like glass beads. He looked down at her shoe and winced. That thing gave up. It's still technically a shoe. She tried for lightness and managed thin. "Technically," he said, then lowered his voice. "You headed home now?" "Not yet. Reconciliation sheets for the Devereux event still need final coding. Banquet manager wants them in before 6. She rubbed her thumb against the lip of the paper cup. "If it posts before payroll run, I might get the extra shift differential this week." Mateo leaned one shoulder to the doorframe, concern crossing his face and retreating just as quickly. The practiced restraint of people who worked around wealth but did not belong to it. "You need a ride after?" "Bus is fine." He glanced past her at the rain blowing diagonal across the dock. "Fine isn't the word I'd use." She gave him the kind of smile service workers used on impossible guests and worried friends alike, all reassurance and no room for follow-up. "I'll make it." He held her gaze a second, then nodded, accepting what she could offer. "Text when you get in." "I will." When he went back inside, the door sighed shut and then left her with rain, concrete, and the distant hum of climate control units high above. Zoe tipped her head against the cool metal post and closed her eyes for 3 breaths, counting in Korean the way her mother had taught her when panic started to climb. Hana, dol, set. On the exhale, she opened her eyes and checked the time again as if it might have softened while she wasn't looking. 2:17. Her tote felt heavier than it should have, loaded with invoices, a chipped makeup bag, a backup phone charger wrapped in tape, and the orange folder she kept hidden under everything else. Guardianship documents, medical authorizations, school forms. Her brother, Min Jun, had fallen asleep on the living room sofa when she left for her shift at noon. Textbook open on his chest, insulin pen lined up beside the lamp like a ritual object. He was 16, and trying very hard to be the kind of teenager who did not cost money. As if frugality could shrink a diagnosis. She had kissed the top of his head without waking him, and promised she'd be back before sunrise with breakfast from the 24-hour place on 9th. Because promises were one currency she still controlled. Her phone buzzed again. Not a bill this time. A message from Min Jun, sent at 1:03 a.m., likely during one of the nights he woke hungry and shaky. "You still at work? Don't forget to eat." The simplicity of it caught behind her sternum. She typed back with stiff fingers. "Almost done. You too. Check your sugar before sleep." 3 dots appeared, vanished, then returned. Did. 109. "Good night, Nuna." "Good night, baby brother," she typed, then erased baby and sent good night. She slipped the phone into her pocket and stared at rain pocking the concrete in restless circles, listening to the building breathe around her. Bellamore Tower sold itself in brochures as timeless luxury. White stone facade, private residences above corporate suites, ballrooms wrapped in crystal and brass. At ground level, its lungs were service corridors, freight elevators, break rooms that smelled like bleach and fryer oil, women with swollen ankles balancing 3 jobs, and men with old back injuries lifting banquet chairs for guests who talked about market volatility over imported wine. At 2:29, she pushed inside and crossed the service hallway toward the accounting annex, passing carts stacked with folded linens and silver warming trays streaked with condensation. The heat hit her face first, then the mixed scents of detergent, garlic, wet wool, and expensive perfume clinging to the air long after the donors had gone. Her blazer, thrift store charcoal with one inner seam hand-stitched by her own tired fingers, scratched at her wrist. She rolled the cuffs twice and sat at the narrow desk assigned to overflow staff, where 2 monitors glowed with spreadsheets and vendor logs, code columns, invoice numbers, signature initials. She moved through them with practiced speed, shoulders rounded, eyes burning by the 3rd tab. There was a strange relief in numbers when they stayed obedient, when debits and credits answered each other, when an error had a discoverable source and a correctable fix. Life outside the screen refused that logic. Invoices could be reconciled. Fear could not. At 3:06, her stomach cramped with a hollow, sharp twist that made her press a fist to her abdomen and wait it out. She had eaten half a dinner roll between table 17 and 18, then forgotten about food while clearing champagne flutes and replacing centerpieces. On the desk beside her sat a plastic container with 2 hard-boiled eggs from home, untouched because she was saving them for the bus ride. She peeled one now and sprinkled it with salt from a packet she kept in her wallet, chewing slowly while her eyes tracked line items. Rent, electric, pharmacy. She built her own silent ledger with each bite. If tips held at 86 and payroll posted by Friday, maybe she could cover 1 notice and partial on the 2nd. The insulin had to come first. It always came first. Someone laughed in the corridor, bright and brief. Then the sound faded. Zoe signed off on a beverage variance and reopened the internal calendar to check morning assignments. Banquet floor at noon tomorrow, evening private dining backup at 7. She stared at the grid and calculated sleep in fragments. 2 hours if the bus aligned, 3 if she skipped shower, 4 if Min Jun's glucose alarm stayed quiet. The monitor light reflected in the office window, turning the glass into a mirror. She saw herself in overlay. Dark hair twisted into a clip that had started to slip. Concealer worn thin under her eyes, collar slightly wilted from steam and rain. 28 and already moving like someone older. Not from years, but from repetition. Work, bills, home, medication logs, work again. She had once imagined graduate classes in accounting, certification exams, a desk with her name printed on a plaque. Now she measured ambition by whether she could keep the lights on and avoid collection calls during her brother's homework hour. At 3:41, the landline on the annex desk rang, an old analog chime that sounded too loud in the near-empty room. Zoe blinked at it, startled, wiped her hand on her skirt, and picked up on the second ring. Accounting overflow, Zoe speaking. A woman's voice, precise and unhurried. Ms. Park, this is Elise from Executive Residence Operations. Remain available. You may be required upstairs for language support. Zoe straightened without meaning to. Language support? Korean contract review, private signing. You are listed as certified in legal translation. Her certification had been a side qualification from another life, one she had filed away because banquet shifts paid faster than document work. I can assist if needed, she said carefully. You are needed now. Service elevator C level 52. Report to the residence anteroom in 10 minutes. Dress code, formal black. Zoe looked down at her damp skirt, her split shoe, the coffee stain at the cuff she had tried to blot with club soda. Her throat tightened anyway. I'm currently in banquet uniform. A pause, then. Do what you can. Be punctual. The line clicked dead. For a moment she sat with the receiver still in her hand, listening to the empty signal hum against her ear. Level 52 meant the Ferrante penthouse. Territory staff spoke about in lowered voices and careful syntax, where meetings happened without paper trails and orders traveled down through 3 layers of management before they reached people like her. She set the phone down slowly and checked the time. 3:43. 10 minutes. She opened her tote and pulled out the only blazer she owned that might pass in elite rooms, the charcoal thrift store one she had worn for interviews in court offices and funerals. Then smoothed the lapels with both palms as if pressure could erase wear. In the restroom, she ran water over a paper towel and scrubbed at the rain line on her hem, repinned her hair and straightened, watching herself in the spotted mirror with a steadiness that cost effort. Keys, phone, ID badge. When she stepped into service elevator C, the doors closed on the smell of detergent and steel, and the gold numbers began to rise. The elevator climbed in a hush so complete Zoe could hear the wet fabric of her skirt cooling against her knees. 47, 48, 49. The gold numerals reflected in brushed steel above her head. And with each floor, the building changed character around her, as if service corridors and freight carts had been another city under the same roof. By the time the display reached 52, her pulse had settled into that hard, deliberate rhythm she used for bank calls and pharmacy counters, the one that kept her voice level even when her hands shook. The doors opened to white stone veined in gray, a runner carpet thick enough to mute footsteps, and a vestibule lit by low crystal sconces that made everything look expensive and untouchable. A woman waited just beyond the threshold in a black suit so sharply tailored it seemed cut from shadow. Her hair was pinned without a strand out of place, and an earpiece glinted at her right ear. Elise Marrow, she said, not offering a hand. Executive Residence Operations. You are 2 minutes late. Zoe glanced at the wall clock inset into marble. 3:53. You asked for 10 minutes from the call. I came as quickly as I could. Elise's gaze dipped to Zoe's shoes, paused at the split sole, then lifted again with perfect neutrality that felt more cutting than contempt. Then we will proceed with urgency. You will address principals as Mr. Ferrante and Counsel Romano. You will not speak unless asked. You will translate verbatim. No commentary, no interpretation bias, no familiarity. Is that understood? It is. Elise stepped aside and motioned her through a pair of lacquered doors where 2 staff members in matching black uniforms stood with tablets. Both looked at Zoe once, quickly, then away in the way people did when hierarchy had already been explained to them. The room beyond opened into a long gallery where rain pressed against floor-to-ceiling glass and city lights smeared across wet darkness. A dining table of dark wood sat under a chandelier that fractured light into precise white shards. On one side stood 3 men in tailored black, all cufflinks and controlled stillness, papers arranged in strict stacks before them. Zoe became sharply aware of her thrift store blazer, the frayed thread at one cuff, the faint detergent scent that belonged to laundromats and rushed rinse cycles. She moved to the end chair Elise indicated and set her tote at her feet. A silver-haired attorney with rimless glasses looked up first. "Miss Park, I'm Paolo Romano." His tone carried the polished patience of someone used to being obeyed. "You are certified for Korean legal translation?" "Yes." "Court and contract certification?" "Good. We need precision tonight." Elise leaned in near Zoe's shoulder, her voice soft but public enough for everyone in the room to hear. "Sit upright, Miss Park. In this room, posture is part of professionalism." Heat climbed Zoe's neck. She straightened slowly, jaw tight, and fixed her eyes on the folder in front of her so she would not have to see whether the uniformed staff had noticed. She could feel they had. Humiliation always had a physical map. Throat narrowing, ears hot, fingers suddenly clumsy. Romano slid a document toward her, pages flagged with color tabs. Korean language clauses were added by an offshore counterparty. We require immediate verification before execution. Read each contested section aloud in English. We will compare against our translated draft. Zoe opened the packet and scanned the first page. Dense legal syntax, asset transfers, escrow timing, indemnity obligations. Familiar terrain. The shape of the language steadied her. She began with the first flagged clause, translating in a clear, measured cadence, careful with modal verbs and liability phrasing, marking where intent and legal effect diverged. Romano interrupted twice to challenge terms, and each time Zoe pointed to specific Korean constructions and offered alternatives with narrower legal risk. One of the men in black, young, watchful with a scar at his jaw, stopped typing and listened more closely. Elise remained near the doorway, arms folded, studying Zoe like she was evaluating fault lines. 15 minutes into the review, a side door opened without announcement. The room changed before Zoe fully turned. Conversation flattened, shoulders squared. Even Romano's pen stilled for a fraction of a second. Luca Ferrante entered in a dark suit without tie, white shirt open at the throat, rain-dark hair pushed back from his forehead as if he had come in fast from somewhere colder. He did not fill the room by volume, he did it by gravity. Dark eyes crossed the table once, taking inventory, then settled on the documents. "Status," he said. Romano stood. "Final language verification on the Korean addendum, Mr. Ferrante. Ms. Park is reviewing contested liability clauses." Luca's gaze shifted to Zoe. Not lingering, not soft. Simply exact. "You're from banquet operations." "Banquet and accounting overflow," she said, then corrected herself under Elise's earlier rule. "Mr. Ferrante." He gave a brief nod and took the seat opposite her. Up close, she saw a faint white line near his left temple, old and thin. "Proceed." Zoe returned to the text. Clause 3, Clause 4. She translated a phrase that converted discretionary support into binding long-term obligation and watched Romano's mouth flatten. The discrepancy was not minor. It changed leverage. Romano exhaled through his nose. There is also a personal provision the counterparty insists on, tied to witness status and family protections. He tapped another tab and looked at Luca, then at Zoe. Given the climate, they propose legal cover through marital designation for the protected party. It is procedurally efficient. The words landed like a slap disguised as policy. Protected woman. Protected name. Zoe felt every eye in the room turn toward her, as if she were an object to be tagged and moved. She looked directly at Romano. I don't need a husband. Silence snapped into place, crisp and immediate. Elise's expression did not change, but her fingers tightened once against her sleeve. One staffer at the wall shifted his weight and then went still. Luca did not raise his voice. He did not look surprised. Good, he said, low baritone carrying across crystal and glass. Because I need a witness. He pushed a sealed black ledger across the table toward Zoe. No ring, no contract line with her name attached. Just the ledger, wax mark unbroken, and the unspoken weight of consequence. Romano adjusted his glasses. Mr. Ferrante, with respect, witness exposure increases. Noted, Luca said. The attorney fell silent. Zoe stared at the ledger, then at Luca. A witness to what? To facts that outlive intimidation. His eyes held hers, level and unreadable. You translate, you account, you notice details. Tonight, that matters. By 4:21, rain had intensified against the glass so hard it sounded like static. Elise moved to the wall console and dimmed one bank of lights, reducing glare on the table. And in that shift of brightness, Zoe noticed a corridor monitor mounted near the service entry. 6 camera tiles glowed in a neat grid. One flickered, cleared, then went black for a beat before returning. No one commented. Romano resumed discussion of filing protocol, and Luca signed 2 pages with a silver pen, each motion economical. Yet a current had entered the room, subtle and wrong. A soft knock came from the service door. Elise opened it 6 inches, listened, then frowned. Valet transfers early. Send them to operations, one of the suited men said. Elise shook her head. Message marked immediate for Mr. Ferrante. She stepped aside as a young valet in soaked uniform came in clutching a key ring and an envelope gone damp at the edges. He couldn't have been older than 20. Water dripped from his sleeves onto the marble, and his hand trembled hard enough that the keys rattled in bright, nervous bursts. Sir, he said to Luca, trying for steady. Apologies. This was handed off at lower service. They said direct delivery. He took 1 step forward. The keys slipped from his fingers, struck the floor, and skittered under the console table. The sound was small, but Zoe flinched, not at the metal on stone, at his face. Pallor under brown skin, pupils too wide. Breathing too fast for a short walk from the elevator. Fear sat on him like cold rain. Elise's voice sharpened. Pick those up. The valet crouched, missed once, then gathered the keys with both hands before standing again. Sorry, ma'am. Luca watched him for a long second. Who gave you the envelope? Man at service intake, dark coat, didn't show badge, he knew your name. The valet swallowed. He asked which elevator your guest used. Zoe's skin prickled along both arms. Romano set his pen down. Description? Tall, mid-30s maybe, smiling the whole time. The valet's throat worked. Didn't look like staff. Elise took the envelope, checked the seal, then passed it to Luca without opening it. Security should have logged this. They didn't, Luca said. Across the room, the corridor monitor flickered again. Tile 4, the same camera, blinked out for 2 full seconds, came back with faint static, then stabilized. Zoe tracked it without moving her head. In the reflection of the monitor glass, she saw her own face, composed by force, From somewhere behind the mirrored panel near the hall junction came muffled voices, too blurred to parse at first. The panel looked decorative, smoked and seamless, but she knew from banquet routes that it hid a service passage connecting private elevators to back corridors. She had pushed linen carts past it twice on holiday shifts. A male voice rose enough to cut through the rain. Warm, conversational, carrying that polished friendliness people trusted before they learned better. "Just helping locate someone," he said. "Which elevator did the little liar use?" Zoe's breath caught halfway in her chest and refused to move. The room contracted to hard light, wet marble, and the old muscle memory of danger. Stay still. Stay quiet. Do not give him an angle. She knew that voice with a certainty that made her knees weak. Miles Cade had found her. Miles Cade had found her, and Zoe's body recognized that fact before her mind shaped it into language. Her throat closed so fast she swallowed against nothing, pulse thudding high and uneven as if her ribs had shrunk around her lungs. The mirrored panel at the hall junction reflected fractured light from the chandelier, and in that broken glare she saw movement behind smoked glass, a tall silhouette angling toward the service access with practiced confidence. Luca rose without scraping his chair. "Elise." Elise was already at the wall console, fingers moving across the security interface. "Hall camera 4 dropped twice. I'm rerouting corridor feed." Her voice stayed clipped, but the tendons in her neck stood out. She touched her earpiece. "North Detail report." Static answered first, then a male voice. "North Detail delayed at ballroom transfer. 2 minutes out." "Unacceptable," Elise said. Romano capped his pen and looked at Luca, alarm hidden under formal diction. "If this concerns the witness protocol, we should relocate immediately." Luca's eyes stayed on the mirrored panel. "We're past protocol." The service door opened 3 inches, then wider, and Miles stepped through as if he had been invited. He wore a charcoal coat still wet at the shoulders, expensive enough to pass in any donor reception, with a silk tie loosened just enough to imply urgency without disorder. His smile appeared first, bright and public, the one that had convinced neighbors he was generous and patient, the one Zoe had watched harden in private when doors locked. He looked around the room with mild curiosity, then landed on her with theatrical relief. "There you are." His tone was warm enough to make strangers trust him within seconds. "I've been looking all over this building." Zoe did not stand. Her fingers dug into the edge of the table beneath a folder. The last time she had seen him, he had stood in a courthouse hallway and whispered that courts loved men who sounded calm. He sounded calm now. Elise stepped into his path. "This level is restricted. You'll leave immediately." Miles gave her a polite nod that did not concede anything. "I'm sorry, ma'am. This is personal and urgent." He angled around her before she could block him again, closing the distance to the table with smooth confidence. "Zoe, your phone's been off. Minjun's school called me twice. You can't disappear and expect me to fix your chaos." The mention of her brother hit like cold water down her back. Zoe forced her voice steady. "Do not use his name." Miles spread his hands in a gesture of injured patience and turned toward Luca, as if appealing to a reasonable host. "Mr. Ferrante, I assume? I hate to interrupt your evening, but this woman has taken documents that belong to my firm and moved funds from a joint account we were litigating. I came to resolve it quietly." Romano's gaze sharpened. "That is a serious allegation." "It is," Miles said, still smiling. "And I have records." He reached into his coat and produced a folded packet. As he did, Zoe saw the old behavioral tell she had learned too late. The right jaw muscle jumped once before he escalated. The room smelled of rain and polished wood and the faint citrus of expensive cleaning products. And under it, she caught the stale smoke that always clung to him after long nights pretending control was charm. Luca did not touch the packet. "You bypassed 3 access points to enter my residence." "I was directed here by staff," Miles replied smoothly, then looked at Zoe again. "She panics when confronted. I didn't want a scene." He was creating one by design. 2 uniformed staff remained near the wall, frozen between protocol and fear. The valet who had dropped the keys stood by the door, drenched and trembling, eyes moving from Miles to Zoe and back, as if recalculating danger in real time. Zoe felt her hand start to shake. She let it. The tremor gave cover as she lowered her phone from the table edge to her lap and thumbed it open behind the folder. Translation app first, because that icon belonged in this room. From there, she tapped a hidden shortcut Min-Jun had set for her months ago after one of Miles's late-night calls. Emergency upload. The screen flashed once. She kept her face blank. "Miles Cade," she said clearly, each syllable deliberate. "You do not have permission to approach me." His eyes flicked down, registering the formal address, then narrowed almost imperceptibly. "Listen to yourself. Legal language now?" He laughed softly for the room. "She does this when she's cornered. Performs." Zoe angled the phone, camera lens barely peeking above her fingers. "Leave audio activated." She tapped 3 contacts in sequence without looking. Ferrante Security Chain, District Financial Crimes Tip Intake, and Backup Cloud. Send. Miles took 2 steps closer. "You stole from me, Zoe. You drained an account and fabricated debt notices in my name. Tell him." His smile stayed in place while his voice dropped for her alone. "Tell him before I petition guardianship first thing in the morning." Her skin prickled from scalp to wrists. There it was, the private threat wrapped inside public concern. She lifted her chin and spoke louder, for the recording and every witness in the room. "For accuracy, repeat that, Mr. Cade. You're threatening to challenge my brother's guardianship if I report your financial coercion." Romano's head came up sharply. Elise turned fully toward Miles now, one hand at her earpiece and one near the panic panel. Miles's smile thinned. "I'm saying you're unstable, and the court should know." By 4:28, rain struck the glass in hard diagonal lines, loud enough that the room seemed suspended inside water. Luca moved once, a half step that put his body between Miles and the center of the table. Not yet force, only warning. "You're done speaking," Luca said. Miles ignored him and lunged the final distance to Zoe. His fingers clamped around her wrist with precise pressure, thumb driving into the bruised soft skin near the pulse point where pain flared fast and bright. "Get up," he murmured through his smile. "We're leaving." The chair legs scraped as Zoe resisted. The shock of contact collapsed her careful breathing. Marble, crystal, wet wool. His grip. Her vision tunneled, edges blurring with old memory. She heard herself say, "Let go." But it came out thinner than she intended. Elise snapped, "Release her now." Miles tightened, yanking Zoe halfway out of her chair. "She's my wife," he said to the room, voice carrying. "This is a domestic dispute, not your business." "Ex-husband," Zoe gasped, trying to plant her heels. Her split sole slid on polished stone. He dragged her toward the service side, aiming for the same corridor behind the mirrored panel. The valet flinched backward and knocked into a console. One of the staff reached forward, then stopped when Miles shot him a look sharp enough to cut. Applause from a distant lower floor drifted up through the building's ventilation shafts, surreal and muffled, as if another world was celebrating while hers narrowed to a bruising hand and the smell of stale smoke. Luca crossed the room. He moved with controlled speed that erased the space between them in seconds, voice low and barely contained when he spoke. Lock exits. Medical now. Nobody touches her but my team. Orders crackled instantly through Elise's earpiece. All access points sealed. North and west teams move. Repeat, move. Miles pivoted, pulling Zoe harder as a shield. Stay back. This is legal. It stopped being legal when you laid hands on her, Lucas said. Zoe's knees wobbled. Her free hand still held the phone, slick in her palm. A soft vibration pulsed against her skin. Upload complete. Then another. Tip intake received. Reference number generated. She wanted relief. What came was a wave of dizziness so sharp she nearly folded. Miles jerked her again toward the corridor mouth. You don't know what she is. She lies for survival. I survive because I tell the truth after you threaten me, Zoe said, the words tearing out around shallow breaths. She looked at Elise and forced volume through the panic constricting her chest. He threatened insulin access and guardianship. It's in the audio file I sent. Elise answered without taking her eyes off Miles. Received. Time-stamped. That single confirmation shifted the room. Not safety yet, but structure. Evidence existed outside his reach now. Miles read it in their faces, and his composure cracked. The smile dropped. You vindictive little... He swallowed the rest, jaw flexing, then tried another tactic in the same breath, voice turning wounded for any camera that might catch him. Zoe, you're confused. Come home and we'll fix this quietly. There is no home with you, she said. His grip bit deeper. Pain sparked up her forearm, and with it came the old reflex to appease long enough to reduce damage. She hated that reflex. She hated that it still lived in muscle and breath. For one dangerous second she froze, heart hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears over the rain and radio chatter. Lucas saw it. The falter, the narrowing focus, the way her shoulders curved inward as fear tried to make her smaller. His expression hardened into something cold and exact. Zoe, he said, not loud, not soft. Look at me. She did, because command in his voice cut through panic where reason had failed. Dark eyes, steady and unblinking, anchored in front of her. Step left on my count, he said. When I move him, go behind Elise. Do not stop. Miles barked a short laugh. You think she'll run to you? She won't run, Lucas said. She'll choose. He shifted his weight, subtle as breath. 1. Security boots pounded in the outer corridor. Elise angled her stance, opening a narrow lane behind her shoulder. 2. Miles glanced toward the sound, just for a fraction. Now. Lucas struck Miles's wrist with a precise downward motion, not wild force, but targeted control at the joint. Miles cursed and his grip broke. Zoe stumbled free, nearly falling as numbness shot through her hand. Elise caught her elbow and pulled her back 3 steps, placing herself between Zoe and the men with rigid protocol efficiency. Miles recovered fast and surged forward, arm outstretched for Zoe again. Luca intercepted him at the chest and drove him into the wall beside the mirrored panel, forearm across Miles's collarbone, pinning him with contained strength. The glass shuddered. The concealed latch popped and the panel slid 2 inches, revealing the service corridor beyond and 2 startled workers who immediately retreated. Hands visible, Lucas said, voice flat. Do you understand me? Miles strained against the hold. You can't detain me. I can prevent assault in my residence. North detail arrived at a run. 2 security officers in black suits and nitrile gloves already on, one carrying restraint ties, the other a body camera unit clipped high on his lapel. Elise snapped orders without looking away from Zoe. Witness protection protocol. Record all statements. Photograph wrist bruising now. Preserve corridor feeds and access logs. Romano stood rigid at the table, face drained of color, but voice operational. I'm calling counsel and notifying on-site law enforcement liaison. Do it, Lucas said. Miles's breathing turned ragged as he realized the scene had inverted. Audience no longer his weapon. She forged records, he said louder, desperate now. She stole from me. Zoe pressed her shaking hand against her opposite forearm and stepped out from behind Elise before anyone could stop her. Her voice came rough but clear. I documented your debt ledgers, your false medical invoices, and your threats. I submitted them tonight, under your full legal name, in this room. Miles stared at her, stunned enough to go still. She held his gaze through the tremor and added, You don't get to narrate me anymore. Luca did not look back at her, but his next order came with unmistakable finality. Remove him. If he resists, escalate to legal detention and transfer to responding officers. Security took Miles by both arms. He twisted once, trying to wrench free, and Luca stepped closer, voice low enough that only those nearest heard it, edged with restrained fury. You don't come near her again. Miles looked over the shoulders pinning him, eyes bright with a mix of rage and disbelief. This isn't over. It is in this building, Lucas said. They moved Miles into the service corridor, shoes striking marble, protests fading into radio static and rain. The mirrored panels slid shut behind them with a soft, mechanical click that sounded almost gentle after the violence of the last minutes. Silence dropped heavy across the penthouse gallery. Zoe's legs gave a warning tremor, and she braced one hand on the table to stay upright. The bruise already darkened under her skin in the shape of his fingers. Her phone buzzed again in her palm. Financial crimes intake. Agent assigned, immediate callback requested. Evidence chain had begun moving. Elise touched Zoe's shoulder, brisk but careful. Medical is 1 minute out. Stay with me. Luca turned then, controlled rage still visible in the set of his jaw, and looked directly at Zoe as if confirming she was still present, still breathing, still beyond Miles's reach. When he spoke, the command remained, but there was something steadier beneath it. Stay behind me, he said, and this time she did. Stay behind me, he said, and this time she did. One hand braced against the edge of the table while the room repopulated with motion and command. 2 medical responders in black uniforms came through the service door with a compact trauma case, and Elise intercepted them before they reached Zoe, issuing instructions in clipped sequence without looking away from the corridor where Miles had disappeared. Primary witness first. Witness, photograph injuries before ice. Chain of custody labels on everything. No one deletes or rewinds corridor feeds. Her tone was calm enough to steady the air, but the speed beneath it was unmistakable. Luca stood half a step in front of Zoe, not touching her, forming a barrier with posture alone. Status on exits. A voice answered through Elise's earpiece. All penthouse access points sealed. Lobby notified. Local liaison en route. Keep him separated from staff, Lucas said. No hallway contact, no unsupervised transfer. Romano was already on speakerphone with outside counsel, his legal diction flattening panic into procedure. Yes, attempted coercion and physical restraint in a private residence. We have video, audio, and multiple witnesses. I want federal financial crimes looped in now, not at daylight. One medic crouched in front of Zoe. Miss Park, I'm Nia. I need to look at your wrist. Zoe nodded, then had to nod again because the first motion felt disconnected from her body. Her hand still shook in small, fast tremors that made her fingertips buzz. Nia slid a sterile ruler beside the bruise marks and took 3 photos on a secure device, narrating each image number aloud for record integrity. Circumferential thumb pressure. Dorsal bruising. Swelling present. She glanced up. Can you move your fingers? Zoe flexed once, hissed, and said, yes. Pain scale. 7. Luca's jaw tightened. Get imaging at the residence. Nia acknowledged with a quick, yes, sir. Then wrapped Zoe's wrist in a temporary support band and checked her pupils, pulse, and breathing. You're hyperventilating. Slow inhale through your nose, exhale longer than inhale. Zoe tried. The first breath snagged. The second went deeper. On the third, she could finally hear individual sounds again. Rain hammering the glass, radio chatter from security, the scratch of Romano's pen as he logged times. Her phone vibrated in her palm, then rang. Unknown government number. She showed the screen to Elise. Elise checked it, nodded once. Financial crimes intake callback. Put it on speaker. We record. Zoe swallowed and accepted. This is Zoe Park. A woman answered, brisk and awake in the way of people who worked emergencies for a living. Ms. Park, Agent Delaney, District Financial Crimes Task Force. We received your file transfer and threat audio at 4:29. Are you presently safe to speak? Zoe looked at Luca's shoulder in front of her, broad enough to block the corridor entirely. I am now. State your full name and current location for the record. She did. Delaney asked for sequence, names, exact language used in the threat. Zoe gave each piece carefully, using Miles's full legal name every time, repeating the insulin and guardianship statements exactly as she had heard them. When her voice thinned on one sentence, Nia touched 2 fingers to Zoe's forearm in silent grounding while she kept talking. Do you possess additional financial documents not yet uploaded? Delaney asked. Yes. Photos of debt ledgers and invoices in my cloud backup. Do not alter metadata. Do not forward copies outside counsel and law enforcement. A field agent will take formal custody. Romano leaned in just enough to be heard. Counsel Paolo Romano for Mr. Ferrante. We will preserve digital chain and provide mirror copies under warrant protocol. Delaney paused, then said, Understood. Ms. Park, one more question. Are there minors or medically vulnerable dependents at risk tied to this coercion? The words hit Zoe like a second pulse. My brother, 16, type 1 diabetes. He is at home. Luca turned his head slightly. Address, he said. She gave it immediately. Luca spoke to Elise without raising his voice. Team Delta to Park residence, female officer included. Bring a medical cooler and 2 days of insulin supplies from our clinic inventory. Legal emergency custody filing starts now. Elise was already relaying it. Delta rolling in 90 seconds. Zoe stared at Luca, breath catching for a different reason now. He did not offer reassurance in soft language. He turned fear into logistics faster than panic could expand. Agent Delaney came back on. Ms. Park, we can coordinate with protective services if needed. Coordinate with my counsel and Ferrante Legal, Luca said, stepping closer to the phone but keeping his eyes on Zoe. No independent pickup without identity verification and body cam. Delaney's tone cooled into professional agreement. Copy that. Miss Park will dispatch to your secure location for sworn statement. Don't return home tonight. When the call ended, Elise took Zoe's phone, sealed it in an evidence pouch, and handed her a clean temporary device. Your original remains active for forensic pull. This one is encrypted and route limited. Zoe nodded, then asked the only thing she could ask. "Can I call Min-jun?" "You can," Luca said. "From the car, once Delta is at your door." By the time they moved, the penthouse had become an operations grid. Security officers cataloged water drops near the service entry, bagged the damp envelope the valet had delivered, and photographed the key ring where it had fallen. Elise dictated every timestamp, while a second staffer mirrored logs to an offline drive. The valet, wrapped in a dry blanket now, gave his statement twice and signed both copies with shaking hands. At 4:47 a.m., they took Zoe through a private service route instead of the main elevator. Luca walked on her left, Elise on her right, 2 officers ahead and 2 behind. The corridors smelled of industrial detergent and wet wool, a jarring return to the worker arteries of the tower after marble and crystal. Her legs threatened to fold twice, and both times she kept moving because stopping felt like surrendering momentum back to Miles. In the underground garage, rainwater ran in reflective ribbons down the concrete ramps. 3 black vehicles idled with headlights dimmed. Luca opened the rear door of the middle SUV himself. Inside. She climbed in. Nia followed with the trauma case. Elise took the front passenger seat and kept one hand at her earpiece as the convoy rolled. Only once they cleared the second gate did Luca hand Zoe the temporary phone. "Call him." Min-jun answered on the second ring, voice thick with sleep and instant fear. "Nuna?" "I'm okay," she said too quickly. "You never call this early. What happened?" She looked out at rain sweeping across the windshield, then forced steadiness into every word. "A legal issue escalated at work. Security is coming to pick you up and bring you somewhere safe for a day or 2. I'm not leaving without my kit. Take both insulin pens, glucometer, charger, and the orange folder from my desk." A pause, rustling on his end. Then, "Is it him?" Her throat tightened. "Yes." Min-jun went quiet long enough that she thought the call dropped. Then he said, very clear, "I'll be ready when they knock." Luca held out his hand for the phone and spoke in a tone that carried command without threat. "Min-jun, this is Luca Ferrante. My team is 2 minutes out. They have your name and a phrase you choose. Give me the phrase now." Min-jun hesitated. "Blue bicycle." Luca repeated it once. "They will say that phrase before you open the door. You do not open for anyone else. Do you understand me?" "Yes, sir." When the call ended, Zoe pressed her bandaged wrist to her sternum and closed her eyes. Nia adjusted the support wrap and passed her a bottle of water. She drank in short swallows, each one scraping down a dry throat. By 5:10 a.m., they entered a secured residence on the riverside of the city. A converted townhouse from the outside and a controlled medical legal hub inside. The front salon had been stripped to practical furniture. 2 sofas, 1 long table covered in charging docks, 3 wall monitors with live feeds, and a whiteboard marked with names and check-ins. A woman in her 60s with silver hair and an immaculate navy cardigan met them at the entry. "I'm Marta," she said to Zoe. "House manager. You're safe here." Nia led Zoe upstairs to a small infirmary room that smelled of antiseptic and lavender hand soap. A female physician introduced herself as Dr. Han, examined the wrist, ordered portable imaging, and checked the old scar line along Zoe's rib cage when she flinched during a breathing test. "Any prior fractures?" Dr. Han asked. Zoe's answer stuck for a beat. 2 ribs, last year. Documented? No. Doctor. Han looked at her for 1 quiet second, then wrote exactly what mattered. Noted as patient report pending imaging. After x-rays confirmed no new break in the wrist, just deep contusion and ligament strain. Dr. Hahn left pain medication on the bedside table with strict dosing instructions. Marta brought clean clothes and warm broth. Zoe managed 6 spoonfuls before her stomach rebelled, and she set the bowl aside. A knock sounded once on the open infirmary door. Luca stood there with his jacket removed, white shirt sleeves rolled to the forearms, rain and strain, both visible now that the immediate crisis had thinned. A medic behind him taped fresh gauze over a shallow scrape near his shoulder, where he must have hit the wall during the restraint. Under the harsh infirmary light, an older scar cut diagonally across the same shoulder, pale and uneven, the kind that came from metal and survived by luck. "You should rest," he said. Zoe almost laughed at the absurdity of the word, but exhaustion won. "I don't know how." He stepped inside and closed the door halfway, enough for privacy but not isolation. "Then we do the next required thing. Statement with counsel in 20 minutes. After that, sleep." She stared at the scar on his shoulder before she could stop herself. He noticed and pulled the gauze tape flat with 2 fingers. "Old shrapnel," he said. "Long time ago." She nodded, then looked at her own wrapped wrist. "You run this like a military unit." "I run it like people's lives depend on timing," he answered. The precision in his voice stripped away the myth she had built around him in the penthouse. Not a man enjoying power for display. A man who expected systems to hold when panic hit. Luca set a folder on the bedside tray. "Delta reached your brother. Phrase confirmed. He's in transit with a female officer and a medic. Blood sugar was 112 at pickup. Supplies secured." The number hit her harder than any comfort phrase could have. Concrete, verifiable, alive. She breathed out shakily and covered her mouth with her good hand. "He shouldn't have to memorize emergency phrases," she whispered. "He does tonight," Luca said, and there was no softness in the fact, only respect for it. "Because you acted before anyone could silence you." She looked up. "I acted because I ran out of options." "Most people freeze there," he said. "You documented." The room held a long quiet. Rain tapped the window, gentler now. Downstairs, a printer started, stopped, started again. When Zoe spoke, the words came without planning. "He forged medical debt under shell vendors and told me if I challenged him, insulin prices would become administrative complications. He said courts trusted men who sounded calm. He kept every threat just polite enough to deny." Her breath hitched once. "The ribs happened when I told him I'd file anyway. He waited until winter so I could hide bruises under layers." Luca listened without interruption, expression hardening only at the edges, controlled rage compressed into stillness. "Why didn't you report then?" "Because he had copies of guardianship paperwork, and one judge already called me emotional in open court." She swallowed. "I believed him when he said no one would testify if he framed me first." He leaned one hand on the tray table, voice lower. "My mother died because no one testified. Wrong night, wrong men, 10 witnesses who saw enough and said nothing. Case collapsed in 6 weeks." His gaze stayed on hers, unflinching. "That is why I said I needed a witness. Not for theater, for court, for something that survives fear." The admission reframed him with blunt force. Not a demand for loyalty, a demand for record, for facts that could not be charmed away. Zoe let that settle, then said, "I won't be managed into silence again. Not by him, not by you. If I stay under your protection, there are terms. Name them. No forced marriage language in any filing. No decisions about my brother without my signature unless he's actively crashing. No hidden operations using my statement as bait." "Agreed," Luca said immediately. Reciprocal terms. You do not leave secured locations without clearance, and you tell me before contact with anyone tied to Cade's firms. She considered, then nodded once. Agreed. A soft knock interrupted them. Elise stepped in with a tablet. Update. Suspect transferred to on-site officers, then federal hold per task force request. Initial charges logged, coercion, assault, witness intimidation pending fraud review. Also, Min Jun arrived. Zoe was already moving before the pain in her wrist reminded her to slow. Luca steadied the tray table out of her path rather than touching her directly. Elise, he said. Bring him here. Elise inclined her head and disappeared. Zoe sat back on the edge of the bed, heart hammering in a new rhythm now, half fear, half relief, too sharp to trust. Luca remained by the door, not crowding her. A dark, silent line between her and anything that might still try to come through. When footsteps rushed down the hall and a boy's voice cracked on, Nuna. She finally believed the night had turned in her favor. When footsteps rushed down the hall and a boy's voice cracked on, Nuna. Zoe finally believed the night had turned in her favor. And then Min Jun was in the doorway in an oversized hoodie, hair flattened on one side from hurried sleep. Medical kit clutched to his chest like a shield. She stood too fast, pain flashing from her wrist to her elbow, and he reached her first anyway. Careful in the way children of crisis learn to be careful long before they should. He wrapped one arm around her middle, avoiding the bandage without being told, and buried his face against her shoulder. I'm okay, he said into her sleeve, voice already shaking with held-back panic. I'm okay. You don't have to take care of me first, she whispered, pressing her cheek to the top of his head. I'm your sister. I'm supposed to say that. He gave a small, breathless laugh that broke at the edges, then pulled back to look at her wrist. Did he do that? Yes. She refused to soften it. He won't do it again. Min Jun glanced past her, taking in Luca by the door, Elise in the hall, the medic still standing with a clipboard. The way his posture changed was subtle but unmistakable. Teenager became evaluator, scanning adults for competence, intent, risk. He lifted his chin at Luca. You're Mr. Ferrante. I am, Luca said. You did exactly what you were told. Good. Min Jun's gaze stayed steady. Your team used the phrase. They brought my insulin cooler. They didn't touch my room. They had orders. Thank you. Luca inclined his head once, accepting gratitude as operational closure, not sentiment. Dr. Han needs your glucose reading logged and your supplies checked. 2 minutes. Min Jun looked at Zoe for permission. She nodded. Go. Then come back. When he left with the medic, the room quieted again. The kind of quiet that came after a siren cut out and left everyone listening for what might follow. Zoe sat on the bed slowly this time, exhaustion settling into her bones now that relief had somewhere to land. Luca remained where he was, one hand on the half-open door, creating distance and security in the same gesture. Your brother is observant, he said. He had to be. Zoe flexed her fingers inside the support wrap and winced. Kids in stable homes learn piano or soccer. He learned which pharmacy would extend credit if he sounded polite enough. Luca's eyes moved to her bandage, then back to her face. He still has you. The statement should have comforted her. Instead, it struck the center of an old fear, that love made leverage, and leverage invited predators. She looked away toward the rain-striped window. Dawn had not arrived yet, but the black sky had thinned to deep graphite over the river. I have him because I don't trust anyone else to keep him safe, she said. That includes powerful men who solve problems fast. A beat passed. That includes me. was not a question. Zoe nodded anyway. Luca stepped fully into the room and closed the door to a narrow gap, preserving line of sight to the corridor. A primary consideration is control. Men like Cade use it to isolate. I use it to prevent damage. His voice stayed even, but something tightened beneath it. From your vantage point, those can look similar. They can feel similar too, she said, and hated that her voice sounded unsteady. Orders, routes, phones taken for evidence, people telling me where I can stand, when I can sleep, who I can call. He took that in without flinching. Then we adjust framework. You keep your temporary phone on your person. You approve every movement involving your brother unless medical emergency applies. You review security plans before execution. If anyone on my team overrides that without cause, they report to me directly. Zoe looked back at him. The offer was not romantic, not warm. It was a contract in plain speech. She trusted contracts more than promises. Still, attraction arrived in the worst possible moment, involuntary and unwelcome, sparked by competence and restraint and the fact that he listened like her words had legal weight. Fear rose beside it, equal force, because she had once mistaken decisive behavior for safety and paid for that mistake in bone and breath. You make it sound simple, she said. It's not simple. It is structured. She almost smiled despite herself. You're not used to people arguing with your structure. I prefer it when they do before operations fail. A knock sounded. Dr. Han entered with Min Jun and a slim tablet. Glucose is 116. Supplies are complete. He's dehydrated and running on adrenaline, same as everyone else. She handed Zoe 2 tablets in a cup. Pain medication now. Food within 30 minutes. No heroics. Min Jun perched on the edge of the guest chair, eyes still fixed on Zoe's wrist. Do we have to stay here long? Luca answered before Zoe could, but he looked at her when he did. Until the task force completes first interviews and a judge signs temporary restrictions. Earliest movement is after full daylight. Min Jun nodded like someone much older. Can I set up my meter in the next room? Marta appeared at the door with a tray before anyone called for her. Broth, toast, sliced fruit, 2 thermoses. You can set up anywhere you like, she told him gently. I'll show you a room with an outlet by the bed. When they were alone again, Zoe swallowed the medication and forced down half the broth, while Luca reviewed a security map on Elise's tablet just outside the door. Through the narrow opening, she saw him in profile, under corridor light. Shirt sleeves rolled, scrape taped at the shoulder, expression hard and unreadable as he issued updates in low-clipped phrases. He never raised his voice. People moved anyway. By 5:38 a.m., a thin line of gray had formed over the river, and the rain had softened to a steady hiss against glass. Zoe stood to find the restroom, misjudged her balance when dizziness hit, and caught herself on the bed frame with her good hand. Luca was beside her before she could wave him off, not touching until she nodded once. Then his palm steadied her elbow, warm and firm, and every nerve in her body registered the contact with humiliating clarity. Medication and shock, he said. Sit. I'm not fragile. I know. His hand left her arm immediately, as if he understood the exact threshold she could tolerate. You're also injured. She sat, breathing through the flare of pain and the sharper pulse underneath it. When she looked up, he was watching her with that same controlled focus he had used in the penthouse, but softer at the edges now. Less command than concern. The shift was small, non-trivial, and it unsettled her more than the orders had. Why me? She asked quietly. You have lawyers, auditors, people with clean records and less baggage. Why put this much around a banquet worker with overdue rent? Because you saw him and still chose evidence over silence, Lucas said. Because your statement was precise under pressure. Because juries understand truth better when it comes from someone who had every reason to disappear and stayed anyway. Zoe held his gaze for 3 seconds, then looked down at the steam rising from the untouched tea on her tray. If this turns into ownership language, I walk. His reply came without pause. Protection is not ownership. If anyone confuses the two, starting with me, you walk. Elise's knock came sharp this time, urgency contained but visible. We have a legal interference attempt, she said from the doorway. Task force and federal liaison on secure line. They need Ms. Park in operations now. Luca's posture changed in an instant. Details. Cade's counsel filed emergency claims asserting spousal access and alleging mental instability to challenge witness reliability. He is requesting immediate phone contact and location disclosure. Elise met Zoe's eyes. They need your live rebuttal for the judge reviewing temporary restrictions. A cold current moved through Zoe's chest, familiar and vicious. Not a surprise, but still a blow. Miles was doing exactly what he always did, weaponizing procedure, smiling while he erased her. I'll do it, she said, already standing. Luca looked at her bandaged wrist. You can record a sworn declaration from here. No. Zoe shook her head once. He built his whole strategy on me, looking afraid and disorganized. I want him to hear me say no where everyone can document it. For the first time since he entered the infirmary, something like approval flashed across Luca's face, quickly hidden. Then we do it your way. Operations had shifted from controlled shelter to live legal theater by the time they entered the salon. 3 monitors displayed split feeds. One from District Financial Crimes, one from a federal marshal office, one from a courthouse clerk interface awaiting judicial review. Agent Delaney sat at the far end of the long table with a headset and 2 evidence drives. Romano stood beside her with a binder open to flagged statutes, tie loosened but voice precise. Ms. Park, Delaney said, we need your direct statement on coercion, prior injury, dependency threats, and explicit refusal of contact. Keep language factual. No speculation. Zoe took the chair centered on camera. Luca remained behind and to her right, close enough that she could feel the steadiness of his presence without seeing his face. Minjun stayed with Marta in the adjacent room, door open, within earshot, but out of frame. The clerk confirmed identities. The judge's audio connected, voice formal and clipped. Proceed. On the second monitor, a holding room feed came online. Miles appeared seated at a metal table beside his attorney, suit jacket removed, expression composed as if he were attending arbitration instead of custody intake. He saw Zoe and smiled, patient, almost tender. It made her skin crawl. Zoe, he said into the mic, you look exhausted. You're being manipulated. Delaney cut in. Mr. Cade, you will remain silent unless addressed. Miles leaned back, smile fixed. Romano nodded to Zoe. When ready? She placed both hands flat on the table, one wrapped, one shaking slightly, and began. She stated her name, age, and relationship history. She described the penthouse incident minute by minute, including the grip, the words, the attempt to remove her through service corridors. She repeated the insulin threat verbatim. She reported prior rib injuries as patient disclosure with pending corroboration. Her voice broke once on the phrase, little liar, then steadied again. I refuse all direct and indirect contact from Miles Cade, she said, looking into the camera. No calls? No intermediaries? No legal pretext for location access. He does not get proximity to me or my brother. Miles laughed softly, performing disbelief. Your brother needs stability. You can barely pay rent. Zoe turned her head to his monitor, and this time she let the anger show, clean and controlled. You forged debt under shell vendors and called it stability. You threatened medication access to force compliance. You don't get to use his health as leverage again. His attorney touched his sleeve, warning. Miles ignored him. You're making career-ending accusations in front of people who don't care about you. Before Delaney could object, Luca stepped one pace forward, voice low enough to carry without strain. She is under my protection, under federal witness protocol, and under court review. Any approach to her from this point is documented intimidation. Miles's eyes cut to him, smile gone. There it is. Ownership dressed up as rescue. Luca didn't blink. No. Boundary enforced by law. The judge's audio returned. Mr. Cade, one more interruption and your feed is muted. Zoe drew a breath that felt like broken glass and then like air. For the record, she said, I am not requesting concealment. I am requesting enforceable distance. He loses access to my life today. Delaney slid a document toward her. Emergency petition. Sign if accurate. Zoe read each line, amended one clause to include Minjun by name, and signed with careful pressure from her left hand. Delaney countersigned. Romano filed electronically within seconds, receipt number appearing on the clerk feed. Miles leaned toward his camera one last time, voice stripped of charm now. You think this protects you? Zoe met his stare and answered before anyone else could. It protects the truth. That is enough. The judge granted temporary restrictions pending full hearing, effective immediately. No contact, no proximity, no third-party outreach, and protective status for dependent household member. The marshal feed confirmed service in custody. Miles's screen went dark. Only then did Zoe realize she had been holding tension in every muscle from neck to ankles. She exhaled slowly and sat back, eyes stinging with fatigue more than tears. Luca lowered his head near her shoulder, voice meant for her alone. You drew the line. I kept it where he could see it, she said, and where he cannot cross it without consequences. She looked up at him, fear still present, attraction still present, trust still unfinished but moving. No hidden decisions, she reminded him, quiet but firm. His answer came with the same gravity he brought to orders, but gentler. No hidden decisions. Do you understand me? Yes, Zoe said. And for the first time that night, yes felt like her own word. Agent Delaney muted the court channel and pulled off her headset, the hard lines around her mouth easing by a fraction. Protective order is active in all linked systems. Patrol, court security, and pharmacy fraud enforcement are notified. Mr. Cade is now restricted from direct and indirect contact. She tapped the nearest evidence drive. Next, we lock every loose thread before his counsel invents one. The operations room shifted from confrontation to method. Elise stood at the end of the table with a legal pad and read each item aloud, while a second staffer mirrored entries to digital log. The damp envelope delivered at the penthouse had been opened on camera with gloves and witness signatures. Inside had been a forged transfer form using Zoe's name and a typed note designed to bait a theft narrative. The key ring the valet dropped had included a cloned service override key cut from an internal mold, now bagged and matched to unauthorized corridor access. Camera Tile 4's blinkout had not been random interference. A contractor terminal had looped 6 seconds twice, and the terminal login traced to a subcontractor already in custody on a separate fraud warrant. Zoe sat very still and listened to the evidence become sequence instead of chaos. The sealed black ledger Luca had slid toward her in the penthouse had also been opened under warrant in front of Delaney, Romano, and a federal clerk. Its pages mapped shell vendors, staged debt purchases, and coded payments tied to Miles's private coercion network. The audio file she sent from her phone had been hash-verified. Her original device, sealed in the pouch, had already been forensically imaged and returned to protected storage. The wrist photographs had matching timestamps from medical and security feeds. The old rib injuries she disclosed, once in visible history, were now documented in Dr. Hahn's report and linked to prior urgent care visits Miles's attorney had claimed were sports strain. Nothing floated loose anymore. At 6:02 a.m., Delaney's secure line rang. She listened, asked 3 short questions, and looked up. Field team executed 2 warrants at Cade Financial and 1 at Graybridge Recovery. Servers seized. 2 accountants detained. 1 compliance officer asked for counsel before interview. She glanced at Zoe. Your upload gave probable cause. Without it, this drags for months. Zoe nodded, then checked the temporary phone. 1 message sat unanswered from hours earlier, so ordinary it stung. Mateo, you get home? She typed with her left hand. Not home yet. Safe location. Long night. Thank you for checking. The response came before she set the phone down. Knew something was wrong? Glad you're alive. Tell your brother I found his missing hoodie in Lost and Found. She swallowed a laugh that almost became tears and wrote back. Tell him yourself when this is over. Elise noticed and passed her a glass of water. Operations note, she said quietly. I owe you 1 correction. Zoe looked up. In the penthouse, I corrected your posture in front of staff. Elise's expression did not soften, but her voice did. I enforced protocol to protect workers from being seen as casual by men who look for leverage. I handled that badly. It was unnecessary. I won't repeat it. The apology was clipped and formal, exactly Elise-shaped, and because of that, it landed. Thank you, Zoe said. By 7:11 a.m., Min Jun had fallen asleep in a chair with his meter on his lap and a blanket around his shoulders. Luca lifted the meter, set it on the table, and adjusted the blanket with the same care he used when handling loaded evidence. Zoe watched from the doorway and felt the old suspicion and the newer trust press against each other, neither fully winning. When Luca straightened, she said, If this becomes a cage, I leave. He faced her without irritation. Then keep the key. 3 days passed before the federal financial crimes hearing moved from emergency screens to a guarded courtroom. And by then, rain had cleared into hard October light that made every stone surface look colder than it was. Zoe wore a navy suit Marta found and hemmed overnight, and the new black shoes Min Jun picked because they look like you can run or stand still in them. The courthouse smelled of paper, coffee, and floor polish. Metal detectors hummed. Marshals spoke in low tactical shorthand by the doors. Inside, Zoe took the witness stand with her bandage gone and faint yellow shadows of bruises still visible if someone looked too closely. Delaney sat at prosecution table with the evidence index open. Romano watched from second row as liaison counsel. Luca stood behind the rail. Dark suit, still posture, eyes fixed on her with the controlled focus that had pulled her through panic once already. She testified to sequence, language, and intent. No dramatic flourishes, exact verbs, exact names. When defense counsel tried to recast Miles's words as domestic frustration, Zoe repeated the line from the corridor verbatim. Then the insulin threat, then the guardianship pressure. The courtroom grew quiet enough that the court reporter's keys sounded like rain on tin. Miles asked to speak. His attorney objected, then yielded when the judge allowed a limited statement. He rose, smoothed his cuff, and put on the public smile that used to make strangers defend him for free. "She's coached," he said, "by men who need a story." The judge warned him to stay within scope. Miles turned his head toward Zoe anyway. You always needed a stronger name to hide behind. The old fear moved through her body, familiar and fast. She did not look away. "No," she said. "I needed records." He snapped. The movement was sudden and clumsy, less strategy than rage. He lunged over counsel table, hand diving into a document folio where a compact holdout pistol had been hidden between binders. A marshal shouted. Chairs scraped. Zoe froze for one fraction too long, then pushed backward from the stand. Luca was already moving. He crossed the aisle in 2 strides, struck Miles's wrist offline, and trapped the weapon arm against the table edge before the muzzle could level. The pistol clattered across polished wood and spun to the floor, where a marshal kicked it clear. Another marshal drove Miles down and cuffed him while the courtroom filled with command voices. Weapon secured. Defendant restrained. Witnesses stay seated. Luca stepped back with both hands visible, breathing hard once, then steady again. He looked to Zoe first, not the judge, not the marshals. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, throat tight, and managed, "No." The judge recessed for 9 minutes and returned with new charges added on the record. Attempted murder, witness intimidation enhancement, and courtroom weapons violation on top of coercion, assault, and financial fraud counts already pending. After that, the pace was legal rather than cinematic, but no less decisive. The valet who had trembled at the penthouse testified under immunity that Miles's aide paid him to carry the envelope and ask about elevator routes. The subcontractor tied to camera 4 admitted he looped footage for cash and gave up the cloned key order. The jaw-scarred man from Luca's table, Nico Sardi, gave the full security timeline he had started to signal that night and never finished speaking. Every loaded glance found language. Every interrupted sentence got a record line. 6 months later, on a rain-bright evening in early spring, Zoe stood on the plaza outside Bellamore Tower with certified copies tucked in a waterproof folder. Miles Cade convicted and sentenced. Restitution granted. Debt judgments vacated. Permanent guardianship of Min Jun entered without contest. And court disposition confirming the Level 52 Korean contract signing packet was voided as tainted evidence and formally re-executed under supervised independent review. Min Jun's insulin access was no longer a countdown crisis. Recurring prescription coverage, automatic refill authorization, and locked backup supply were active through his care team. Zoe had ended the overnight double cycle and moved into a single-site language compliance role with capped hours. And for the first time in years, exhaustion was not the price of keeping them alive. The air smelled like wet stone and traffic and the coffee cart by the curb that still burned beans half the time. Mateo waved from the service door, lifted a hand at Min Jun, and disappeared back inside with a crate of glassware. Zoe watched city lights reflect in shallow puddles where she had once counted 86 damp dollars and pretended she could outwork terror. Beside her, Luca held an umbrella angled to cover all 3 of them, though Min Jun kept drifting out from under it to step on the edges of puddles and check messages from school friends who finally thought of him as a normal 16-year-old again. Min Jun glanced between them and said, "I'm getting noodles with Jay. I'll be in the lobby where cameras are. Don't do mysterious adult silence for too long." He left before either could answer. Zoe laughed under her breath, then turned to Luca. His expression was unreadable in the rain light, but his shoulders had lost the constant combat tension she remembered from that first night. "I still don't need a husband," she said. "I know. I need honesty, early, even when it's inconvenient, No protection that erases me. No decisions about my brother around me, over me, or for me. He nodded once. Done. She searched his face for evasion and found none. And your terms? He took a breath, eyes on hers. No disappearing when you're scared. No carrying threats alone because you think burden is the price of love. If danger returns, you call me before you call fear. Rain ticked against the umbrella like a quiet metronome. Zoe felt the weight of files in her hand. Legal language turned into a life she could stand inside without flinching. You said you needed a witness, she said. His mouth shifted, almost a smile, almost not. I still do. To what? To the life we choose on purpose. She considered him for a long moment, then stepped closer until the space between them held warmth instead of strategy. Then witness this, she said softly. I'm staying because I decided to, not because I'm cornered. Luca lowered the umbrella enough that rain misted his shoulders and left her dry. Understood. When Min-jun reappeared at the doors, waving 2 takeout bags like a victory flag, Zoe reached for one with her left hand, felt the strength in her fingers, and did not hide the scar-faint shadows on her wrist. She walked forward between her brother and the man who had refused to let fear write the final version of her life. And the 3 of them went inside together.